All right, I want to welcome everybody to our Tuesday Nomberg Law Live. We do these each Tuesday at 10 a.m. Central, 8 a.m. Pacific. I try to have interesting conversations with people in their areas of expertise. And I've got my buddy, attorney John McElheny, who's with me today. Hey, John, thanks for having some time for us today, bud.
Good morning, Bernard. I'm glad to be here.
Well, I am so glad that you're here with us. We've got a great topic, and no, just for those of you who are worried, we're going to be talking about the law. We're going to stay away from that boring, sometimes boring topic. We are going to be talking about what it means to be a foster parent. John and his wife Leslie are foster parents, and it is, you hear that term, you hear foster parenting or foster care, and everybody who hears that term may think of it a little bit differently. But for John and his wife, who currently are foster parents, we're going to talk a little bit about that journey and what it means. But John, before we jump into that, if you would share a little bit about yourself and your family, and then we'll dive into our topic.
Sure. Like you said, I am a lawyer here in town. I have been a lawyer for, I guess, 13 years now. So you're right, that topic would be pretty boring. I prefer to talk about the kids. In addition to my 9-to-5 lawyer job, I have 3 children. I have a 13-year-old daughter that's in middle school, an 11-year-old and a 9-year-old son that are both in elementary school. We live in the Homewood area. They are at that stage of life where they have 9 activities going at a time. So Leslie and I's schedule pretty much revolves around them. This time of year, it's a lot of ball fields with softball and baseball, which we love. In addition to that, speaking of baseball, I know you're a baseball guy. My first job out of college, I worked for the Baltimore Orioles and worked on their grounds crew for a little while.
Oh, wow.
And that led me to law school up in Maryland. And then my wife and I had our first daughter up there and decided to move back home where both of us are from, around Birmingham.
I did not know that about you. We may have to have round 2 of our conversation just talking about being on the grounds crew for the Orioles. That's covered.
Yeah.
That was, I bet it was a lot of work, but I bet it was fun too for a little while.
Whole lot of work, whole lot of fun for $7 an hour, and it was worth every penny.
Excellent, excellent. Well, let's just talk about how you and Leslie got, I guess, down that road of becoming foster parents. Share with us a little bit of that journey, if you will.
Sure. Well, Leslie and I, ever since we started talking seriously about having children, considered potentially adopting a child from either domestically or internationally. We got married in 2005, and before we knew it, we had 3 kids in 7, 9, and 11. So really nowhere in there did we have time to slow down, go through the adoption process that takes years for plenty of folks and a lot of money. And so after we had 3 kids and about 6 or 7 years of marriage, we said, you know what, maybe 3 permanent children is where God wants us to be. We felt very called that we're supposed to help the least of these, the orphans and the children. And so we said, well, what about foster care? Something that we had never considered because we had focused on adoption. Then we were able to talk to some of our good friends that had done it before. One family in town, Bernard, that I know you're intimately familiar with, or Bart and Leslie Box. Pastor Box is a pastor in town. They've done it for years, and we talked to them about it. They told us that it was a good option. So after prayerful consideration, we decided that it was something we might be called to do. And again, based on recommendations from our friends, we decided to go through an outside agency to allow them to connect us with foster children rather than Bernard going straight through state DHR. The agency that we were recommended, we ended up going through, is called Alabama Baptist Children's Home, or ABCH. They're located sort of the Hoover area. We got connected with them, and they actually have a pretty stringent onboarding process for all foster parents, not just ABCH. But in order to be state qualified, you have to go through, I believe it was either 10 or 12 weeks of in-class training, and it ended up being over 30, almost 35 hours worth of in-class training. And then plenty of additional boxes to check. For example, we had to be water certified. We had to have our fingerprints done, stuff like that that would be required if the state is going to give you a child, and we certainly understand that. So all in all, Bernard, it actually took us about over 11 months, almost a full year from the
Wow.
time we decided to get into foster care to finalize the certification and be allowed from the state to be given a child.
I didn't appreciate that the process, I can understand it a little bit more now, but I didn't appreciate that the process took close to a year just for eligibility purposes. But I bet there's another, John, I bet there's another um, purpose for this as well, the length of time. Maybe it's to ensure that the parents who are jumping into this are truly committed to this process and not just willy-nilly. That's a terrible term, but not, it's, I guess it would be easy to get cold feet or change your mind. But that's, gosh, a whole year process. That's a deal.
Well, and to be candid, it's not a year for everyone. There were a few steps in the process that Leslie and I probably dragged our feet a little bit on. We didn't get our fingerprints. It took us a few weeks when it could have taken us a few days, that sort of thing. But your point about it giving potential foster parents the time to really question their motives and determine if it's really something they want to do is accurate. In fact, I give Alabama Baptist Children's Home a lot of credit. I would say every single class we went to, there was a heavy focus on, sort of the paperwork side of the certification that you're required to do. But they did a great job of intertwining that with the realities and kind of the grittiness, the dirtiness of foster care, so that no one would go into it with blinders on. Because there are a lot of times when you can see stories online, a lot of really good organizations post tutorials of foster parents and children, success stories, and it really makes your heart feel good to read those stories. Bernard, I can promise you that behind every one of those feel-good stories, there's some really dirty, sad stories that these children have been through, the families have been through. And so, yes, in our particular certification class, I believe there were about 10 to 12 couples, and I'd say probably 75% of them ended up with children after the class.
John, share with us a little bit, to the extent I know we have a fine line in me prying into your family and your family decision making, but if you would, how were the dynamics with your biological children in this decision making and then bringing in a new child to the family home?
Yeah, Bernard, you're hitting on some very accurate and intimate points for these families that are trying to decide whether or not they're going to do foster care. And our story was essentially that Leslie and I felt called to do this. And so we sat our children down and we explained to them what foster care was. And we asked them if they thought that they were called also. And all three of them at that point, they were fairly young. Our oldest was probably 10 at that point. So that would have been about 10, 7, and 5, something like that. Didn't really understand it. Honestly, we didn't either, Bernard. We were sort of altruistic with it. They were as well. And so they said, sure, we'll help out a kid. And Bernard, at that point, we had an expectation that we were going to end up with a newborn child in our home. And so that was sort of the stories that we were telling our children, what to expect, new baby in the house. He's going to cry. He's going to wake up at night. He's going to need diapers changed. And they were all on board, right? And they're like, all right, Dad, we'll help you throw away a dirty diaper whenever you need us to, clean a bottle and that sort of stuff.
Little did they know.
Little did they know, little did we know.
Yeah.
We ended up, our first placement, Bernard, ended up being a 1.5-year-old child that we ended up having for 2.5 years, up until the point when he was almost 4. And he was a lot more active than a newborn, I promise you that. And by the end of our just shy of 2.5-year stint with our foster child, all three of our children retired. They could express it in their own ways. That, a 9-year-old can tell you they were kind of getting frustrated with the time that we were spending with the toddler instead of them. And so sadly, it came to an end. Let's see, that would be last August was when our first placement ended. But it wore the kids down. It wore us down. It's gritty, it's dirty.
And that brings me to another thing I wanted to talk about. Fostering from a family standpoint could mean, but doesn't necessarily mean that the child will be permanently placed with you guys. In fact, is it fair to say that in most instances, it's not a permanent home or permanent family that the child who's being fostered remains with the parents or the family that's fostering?
Sure. Bernard, I don't know the statistics about whether or not it's more or less likely.
Yeah.
I know that the state and any organization that helps with putting foster children in homes asks all the time, wants you to be very upfront with them whether or not you are a permanent placement for a potential foster child or not. Leslie and I from day one have felt called to just be temporary foster parents. And so the state and Alabama Baptist Children's Home knew that we were just a temporary placement. Our particular foster son ended up throughout the course of the 2.5 years that we had him, again, just ugly situation, but his biological mother, who was the only parent in the picture, she did end up losing her rights to be her parental rights. And so at that point, it was incumbent upon us to have to tell the state again whether or not we were willing to keep this child that we had had for 2 years. We loved him like our own son. You know, that's a hard conversation to have with ourselves and with the state that says, you know, guys, we really do love this kid. We've given him everything we can for 2 years, but we really don't feel like he's ours forever. We don't feel like he was ever meant to be ours forever. And so at that point, the state started looking for a family that was willing to be a foster home that could turn into a permanent home.
And gosh, John, we only have a limited 30 minutes or so for us to chat today, or otherwise we could talk for the next couple of hours about decision making and how it impacts the children, the parents, and the child being fostered. There's so many places to go.
Sure.
But I wanna pivot because you've now brought up the next I guess topic I wanted to head toward, and that was the Finding the Forever Family and the organization that you're now involved in that is intimately, and my family has been involved in for, gosh, it's almost 20 years since Heart Gallery Alabama was created and founded, and has done such magnificent work over the last more than 15 years, coming on 18, 19 years. And John, tell folks a little bit about Heart Gallery and your involvement, and we'll just shed a little light on them for a few minutes.
Sure. Heart Gallery of Alabama is an organization located in Homewood that takes foster children who are looking for permanent homes and essentially puts a spotlight on them for families looking to adopt children, domestic children, obviously. These are all Alabama placements. And what they do is they get volunteer photographers to go out with these foster children and just do these beautiful photo shoots with these children, just acting like models. It's awesome to see. And they come back with just some amazing photos. And then what Heart Gallery of Alabama does is they take these photos and they make a spread for these children. Obviously, there's a website that folks can search, but also they do physical examples of these children. They take them to malls. They take them to the Barons game once a year, the Biscuits game in Montgomery. I think they're trying to do the Trash Pandas up in Huntsville as well. We're kind of trying to expand across the state. But it's literally a gallery of beautiful children with our fingers crossed and our prayers that the right adoptive permanent family walks by, sees one of these beautiful pictures of the children and says, you know what, that's my child. I didn't even know it, but that's who they are. That's what I needed. And then they're able to put the connection together with the forever family, the child. And that's when DHR gets involved, and they put placements together all the time, almost weekly. We're putting families together, and it's a beautiful thing.
It really is. I've just put in the comments section to our talk the website for Heart Gallery Alabama. Michelle Bierman-Walnick is the executive director and has done just a magnificent job. They have photographed thousands of children over the years, placed hundreds of children with their forever families. And I know you're now on the board and involved with it. And John, if you would talk a little bit about not from the standpoint of being on the board, but being a foster family and getting involved with Heart Gallery?
Sure. We were foster parents before I even knew about Art Gallery of Alabama. Frankly, I'd driven by it thousands of times and never really even noticed it or knew what it was. And then my relationship with you and your brother, David, your partner at Nomberg Law, is what got me involved with Heart Gallery. David is currently the board president. I think he has been for a year or so. I'm not exactly sure of his timeline, but he has explained to me, and you've explained to me, that you have previously held that position. You have been intimately familiar with Heart Gallery of Alabama for years. And David and I were having lunch one day and we found out I was a foster parent. He just sort of started asking me if it was something I would be interested in helping out with. And I said, of course, I'd love to be involved with an organization that is doing nothing but putting children with otherwise no home, permanent home. And so I joined the board about 18 months ago. And as we all know, that was right on the front end of the COVID pandemic before we knew it was going to happen. And so my first year on the board of Heart Gallery Alabama was spent primarily, number one, learning, figuring out what all they do, what all board members are expected to do, and how I could help, but also helping the board determine how to run a nonprofit organization that is solely dependent on people interacting with one another in a time when people can't interact with one another.
Yeah, challenging to say the least.
It was, but they've done a great job. You mentioned Michelle, who's the executive director, works there full time and has for years. I believe she was one of the originators of Heart Gallery Alabama. She steers the ship and she does it phenomenally.
And I know that in September is the annual event at the Barons game. So if people want to get involved with Heart Gallery, I have put the website. But if they want to become more involved, I would suggest that you just go through their contact information. They also have a very active Facebook group or Facebook page. And John, we've got just a couple of more minutes, and I appreciate your time and sharing y'all's journey and experience. And for those of you who are just joining us or may watch us later, I'm talking with Birmingham attorney and friend John McElheny, and he and his wife Leslie are foster parents here in Birmingham, and John is sharing some of their story. Let's talk about that part for just a few more minutes. John, you and Leslie made a decision that it was the thing that it was best for your family, and you wanted to head down that road of becoming foster parents. And you go through a pretty rigorous and lengthy process. But what about, let's talk about, I guess you said earlier of the not so glamorous part of being a foster parent, or frankly of being a parent, can be pretty bad at times. Of course, it has its awesome rewards, but it does have its challenges. But what if you get into a situation, and I don't know if you've had this or heard of this, but what if you get into a situation where you just have a child who you're fostering is just not a good fit for your family, for whatever the reason? It doesn't matter for this, but how do you deal with that? How do you deal with the state agencies that you're dealing with? What goes on there in case it's just not a good situation for the family or for the child?
Sure. It happens all the time, Bernard, unfortunately. The state agency, DHR, and any outside organization like ABCH or any other one has protocols in place to allow these foster children to end up in the homes that they need to be in. Sometimes it's just not yours, right? And so, the practical side of things is usually there's like a 30-day notice period where you hold on to the child while they continue to look for a new foster home for the child. But the more emotional side of things is the hard thing. That's the gritty stuff. And I'll tell you what, being a foster parent really popped our suburban bubble real quick, Bernard. It did it for our children also, which we think is a benefit to them, exposing them to some realities that they otherwise wouldn't have seen. And it opens up conversations with friends, family, our children, about why this child is in our house. We had really detailed conversations with some young biological children, 5, 6 years old, about drug use, maternal drug use, about the consequences of that. And we were asked point blank by our children whether or not our children would ever have to go to another family like our foster child had to. Again, just some hard conversations that opened up some really good lines of communication. But if it ever gets to the point where the child and the family are just not right for one another, you can get out of it. The child can get out of it. There are ways. Sadly, Bernard, part of the problem is there's just not enough foster parents. A lot of people give a whole lot of time for these children. I forgot the statistics. They're mind-boggling when you see them, though, about the need versus the availability of foster parents and foster children. The anecdotal example, I guess, would be after we went through our lengthy process of being certified, we finally got word on a Friday afternoon that we were certified. We had a child in our home before I got home from work the following Monday. So less than 24 hours of business, of a business day, and we had a kid. So as soon as somebody gets certified, they're going to fill them up.
Well, John, let's talk about that in our final remaining minutes. What if I live in a rural part of the state? I don't live in one of the big cities.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have access immediately to a lot of what the bigger cities offer by way of support. How can those parents, and frankly, for any parent, doesn't matter, people wherever you live, how can those people start the process, get involved? Is there a website? Is there a department? You'd mentioned Department of Human Resources, as well as other entities. How would you suggest people just start the process when they've made up their mind, this is what they want to do?
Sure. Well, that's a deep dive for sure. Once you decide to do this, you can just go to Alabama State Department of Human Resources, and they can guide you through the website about who you need to contact in your particular area. Most areas, even if they are rural, they will be covered by a geographic area from some outside organization like Alabama Baptist Children's Home that I keep mentioning just because that's who we used. But there are dozens of those types of services and organizations that can really facilitate the relationship between foster parents and the state. It was a benefit to us, and I would imagine it's a benefit to plenty of people who decide to do this. Importantly, Bernard, there are also ways to help foster parents if you don't feel called to be a foster parent. Mm-hmm. You can just Google, ways to help. There are things like respite care, which is vital, which means, for example, as a foster parent, I'm not allowed to take my foster child out of the state of Alabama because he is a ward of the state. Mm-hmm. And so if my family was going to travel to visit my sister in Maryland or something, we would have to leave the foster child here. And he would have to be left with someone approved by the state, and that's called a respite family. We would leave the child for the weekend, FaceTime with him a couple of times while we were gone, and then come back and he was still ours. So that's an example of something that you can do if you're not willing to dive to the deep end of foster care.
You can dip your toe in. So
that's right.
But yeah, from a logistics, I didn't think about that, about travel and certain things. There are some real logistics there that you have to, as a foster parent, or involved in this at all, that you really have to take into consideration. And John, I found the link in the DHR Alabama's website for foster care, so I've added that to our comments.
Thank you.
Section here. John, if somebody who's watching this wants to ask you either for some advice or to maybe that you can send them in a similar direction for some to get feedback, just to start the process, how can folks reach out to you?
Sure. I'd love to talk to anybody, whether or not they're current foster parents or considering foster care. Grab coffee, grab lunch, have a phone call. It's a topic that Leslie and I are passionate about, so I'd love to keep talking. But email's the best way. John, John, at McElhenyLaw.com. That's McElheny, or you could just Google John McElheny and I'll pop up. Email me, call me, do whatever you need to.
Well, John, before we get out of here, I want to ask you to share with us maybe one poignant, funny, emotional, something good event that has occurred with your experiences as being a foster parent.
Well, the absolute most rewarding part is seeing how many hearts our foster son opened in our community. It was unbelievable the support we received for our foster care that people weren't helping us with our biological children, right? They just had such a willingness to outpour and give to help little baby Jay is what we called him. Anything they could do to help. No one ever spared an ounce of energy or dollars if they needed to. And it really showed me that everybody has a desire to help our children. And it was beautiful to see.
Well, John, thank you so much for spending some time with us today and sharing your journey and a real glimpse, a real insight look at what it's about to be a foster parent. So thank you for what you and Leslie have done up to now, and I'm sure will continue, as well as your involvement with Heart Gallery. So thank you, my friend.
Hey, Bernard, thank you for having me. I appreciate the plug for Heart Gallery. It's a beautiful organization, and if folks want to click the link, they can learn a whole lot about it.
Absolutely, guys. And as I try to do every Tuesday at 10 o'clock Central, interesting conversations with people in their areas of expertise. And you heard it right here from John McElheny about being a foster parent. So thank you guys, as always, for the support, the comments, the questions, the views, etc. We'll come back to you again next week, next Tuesday at 10 a.m. Central with another great conversation. Y'all have a safe week. Take care.